We use nouns all the time when we speak and when we write. Nouns are everywhere, and so are noun clauses. If you don't know what noun clauses are or how to use them, you may have a problem with your fluency, and that's not good for you. These are the top 3 advantages of knowing and using noun clauses correctly. Number 1, they are going to help you speak and write more fluently. You will be able to express and articulate complex ideas, opinions, thoughts, your beliefs with clarity and coherence in a sophisticated way. Advantage number 2, they will help you understand complex text, so no more misunderstandings or errors at work, embarrassing errors. No mistakes, no embarrassing moments. And of course, number 3, you are going to be able to write any type of text, emails, presentations, reports, reviews, articles, speeches, all of them using well-structured sentences. I mean, noun clauses are very important, so make sure, guys, you take notes and you pay attention to the tutorial. By the end of this tutorial, you will have learned 3 things. Number 1, definition of a noun clause. Number 2, types and structure. And number 3, the function or the usage of noun clauses. So if you're ready, let's get started. Let's get this party started. Again with the singing, man. No more singing. Oh yeah, oh yeah. 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 Cool. This guy's mental. Let's get serious. Definition of a noun clause. Well, before, we need to understand what a clause is. A clause is a combination of words that contain a subject and a predicate. There are 2 different kinds of clauses, dependent and independent. Noun clauses belong to the dependent clauses group. There are other types of dependent clauses, adverbial clauses, relative or adjective clauses. If you're not 100% sure about the differences between dependent and independent clauses, or you don't know the different types of dependent clauses, you can check my video, the one right over there, where I cover all those concepts. Let's now discuss the structure of noun clauses and the different types. All noun clauses must be headed by a noun clause marker. After that, you need to have a subject, and then you need to have a verb and some more components. Let's talk about the noun clauses marker, because this is gonna determine the group or type of noun clauses. And we have 3 different groups or types. Number 1, WH words. Number 2, WH words plus ever. I mean, whatever. And number 3, we have that. We also have if and whether. These last 2 mean the same, but there are some differences between the 2 of them. We also have to discuss uses or functions of noun clauses. Noun clauses function or are used in the same way nouns are used. So it is essential that you are clear on the functions of a noun within a sentence. Nouns can be mainly 5 things. Number 1, they can be the subject of a sentence. Number 2, they can be the direct object or the indirect object of a sentence. Number 3, they can also be a complement of a subject. Number 4, they can be the complement of the object, the complement of the direct object. And finally, number 5, they can be the complement of a preposition. Having said all this, it is time to show you some examples so you can see the types or groups of noun clauses that we have, but also their function. I'm going to give you 4 steps that you need to keep in mind and follow one by one when you work with noun clauses. This will help you identify them and start using them correctly. If you can identify them when you read, obviously you will be able to apply these steps when you write. Let's have a look at the steps. Number 1, verbs. They are the most important part of the sentence and you need to identify them first thing. Number 2, you need to identify the subject of each verb. Number 3, look for any noun clause marker. Once you have identified the noun clause marker, you need to apply step number 4, which is look for the dependent clause structure. I mean, noun clause marker plus the subject plus the verb plus any other component. Once you have identified the noun clause, the last thing that you have to do is to identify its function. I mean, is it a subject, direct object, subject complement? Let's apply the steps and see how they work. Let's start with noun clauses from the group 1, WH words. Example number 1. He didn't mention where he wanted to study. Step number 1. We're going to identify the verbs. So on the one hand, we have didn't mention, and on the other hand, we have wanted. Step number 2. Let's identify the subjects of each verb. Didn't mention, its subject is he, and he is also the subject for the verb wanted. Step number 3. Let's look for any noun clause marker. In this case, the noun clause marker is the WH word where. Step number 4. We need to identify the structure of the noun clause. We have where as the noun clause marker, the subject, which is he, the verb, which is wanted, and some other components to study, for example. So that is our noun clause. Step number 5, we need to identify the function. Well, as we can see, this noun clause comes after the verb, a transitive verb mentioned. Therefore, this noun clause is acting or functioning as an object noun clause. Let's analyze next some sentences within group number 2, the group of the WH words plus FA. As sentence number 1, we have whenever you want to go works for me. Sentence number 2, the winner is whoever you want it to be. Step number 1, let's identify the verbs on each of the sentences. In sentence number 1, we have the verb want and the second verb is works. Sentence number 2, we have the verb to be is and the second verb is want. Step number 2 is about identifying the subject of each verb. So the subject of want to go is you, whereas the subject for the verb works is whenever you want to go. Straight away, we can see here that the noun clause is acting as the subject of the verb work. Let's see what the subjects for the other verbs are. For the verb to be, the subject is the winner, whereas for the verb want, the subject is you. Third step, we need to identify the noun clause markers. Okay, in sentence number 1, we have whenever, whereas in sentence number 2, we have whoever. Step number 4, apply the noun clause structure to each one of the dependent clauses. Whenever you want to go is the noun clause in sentence number 1 with the noun clause marker whenever, the subject you, and the verb want to go. Whereas in sentence number 2, the noun clause marker is whoever, the subject is you, the verb is want. The rest are other type of complements or constituents. And the last step is to identify the function of the noun clause in each one of the sentences. As I mentioned earlier, in sentence number 1, the noun clause whenever you want to go is acting as the subject of the verb works, whereas in sentence number 2, whoever you want it to be comes after the verb is. Therefore, this noun clause is acting as a subject complement. Remember, when you have the verb to be, whatever comes after is what we call a subject complement. It is time already to have a look at some examples of noun clauses whose noun clause markers are the words that, if, and whether. Example number 1. That you had an issue with the thing was perfectly obvious. Example number 2. I wanted the thing that I couldn't have. Let's follow the steps one by one. First one, identify the verb tenses. In sentence number 1, we have the verb had and the verb was. In sentence number 2, we have the verb wanted and also couldn't have. Step number 2 is about identifying the subject of each verb. The subject for the verb had in sentence number 1 is you, and the subject for the verb was is actually the noun clause that you had an issue with the team. The noun clause is acting here as the subject of the verb was. In sentence number 2, the verb wanted has a subject, the personal pronoun I. I is the subject of couldn't have. The next step is to identify the noun clause markers. Step number 3. So in sentence number 1, we have that, obviously, and in sentence number 2, we also have that. In this case, we can see it's in bracket, meaning that we can omit it. Next is step number 4, which is about applying the noun clause structure. We must have a noun clause marker, a subject, a verb, an object, and perhaps other components. So is that the case? Yes, it is. And the last step is number 5, which is about identifying the function of the noun clause within that sentence. In sentence number 1, as mentioned earlier, the noun clause is functioning as the subject of the verb was, and in sentence number 2, we have the noun clause acting or modifying the direct object, which is the one thing that I wanted. So in this case, it's acting or functioning as an object complement. Last but not least, let's see some examples of noun clauses with if and whether. Please let me know if you need my help, or we can alternatively say, please let me know whether you need my help or not. With whether, you can also say, please let me know whether or not you need my help. You cannot say the following one. Please let me know if or not you need my help. You cannot say that. There is an exception that needs to be mentioned. Oh yeah? And what is that exception? The exception is that if can never be used as the complement of a preposition. Let me give you an example. It depends on whether the trains are on time. That's perfectly correct. However, you cannot say it depends on if the trains are running on time. That is incorrect. It is time for practice. I'm going to give you several examples, and you need to identify the noun clauses and also establish what their function is within the sentence. Don't forget to share your score or your results in the comment section. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.